Here's the thing, man. We are but like what, a week away, couple weeks away from season 2 of House of the Dragon, and I cannot wait. I am so looking forward to this show. I've got to run back the first season, okay? Because I thought it was the top. I thought it was the best thing that we have seen in the Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire franchise in a very, 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 very long time. It's on par with the second season. I think it's better than the third season of Game of Thrones, and that might get me crucified by some people, but frankly, I don't care. The first season is in fact that good, outside of some questionable decisions in episode 9. Not that fond of episode 2. A couple of episodes that I think are weak, but like I said, I have to run that back in order to really cement my opinion on this. So when I hear the best character from season 1, I don't know, Paddy Constantine's, King Viserys was pretty good, but okay, Damon's definitely a 1A. Viserys is number 1. But he's out here talking about, okay, Matt Smith pulls back the curtain on House of the Dragon Season 2 from losing a showrunner, which has Miguel Sapochnik, okay, the guy who made Game of Thrones look really nice in some of the later seasons, but he's also afflicted with a terminal case of how to piss off the fan base. Case in point, we spent 50 nights shooting The Long Night. You should be thankful for that. Well, nobody could watch it the night that it came out, and yeah, the show, rather specifically the episode, was the impetus for a lot of people to turn on season 8 of Game of Thrones, but he's gone, and the guy who actually is responsible for several of the best episodes of Game of Thrones, full stop, Watchers on the Wall. I think he directed The Red Wedding. I think so, but definitely for sure Watchers on the Wall, which is the best big battle in Game of Thrones and arguably the best single episode of Game of Thrones. I'm just saying, okay, he's coming in and replacing the hack that put visuals and spectacle over what made Game of Thrones Game of Thrones. I would call that a addition by subtraction, heavily. But playing a much weaker Daemon in Crisis? Well, okay, weaker, I guess more vulnerable, because I know a little bit about what to expect for Season 2. I'm trying to keep myself away from spoilers, even though the spoilers that are out there from a book that isn't really that much of a spoiler, like it tells the broad stroke events, but it doesn't have any dialogue. We're talking about Fire and Blood, right? Coffee table book that tells the history of Westeros, right? And House of the Dragon is the definitive telling of the Dance of Dragons, the Targaryen Civil War. So yeah, to hear that Daemon is much weaker because the house that he fought so valiantly in order to maintain its strength is imploding in front of his very eyes could be good, because some of Daemon's best scenes were him at his most quote-unquote emotional. So, on House of the Dragon, HBO's fantasy epic that takes place 2 centuries before Game of Thrones, Matt Smith plays Daemon Targaryen, Warrior Prince. The Rogue Prince, excuse me if you're going to use monikers, get it right, who exists among fire-breathing reptiles and palace intrigue. But if the character were to ever leap deeper into the supernatural, Smith would have some ideas as where he could go. I think Daemon would make a really good vampire. I could imagine him wandering the earth alone for all eternity. Well, he is, by some accounts, influenced heavily by Elric of Melbourne Monet. Michael Moorcock stuff, okay, that, Andrzej Sapkowski, okay, the hack who did The Witcher, just took that entire story wholesale. But anyways, he is kind of Elric is kind of a vampire, which that could be contentious to say, but whatever. Okay, he certainly has the coloring palette platinum blonde. Daemon looks like he could have arrived in a forbidding, yes, or I would say foreboding, but whatever, I don't work for Variety, and the Dark World of Westeros, all the way from Transylvania. Yeah, all that stuff. The fact that, goofy-ass, the 11th Doctor can go ahead and turn in such a powerhouse performance that has people pining for the second season of this fantastic show, just kind of lets you know the talent that Matt Smith has. Yeah, if he's playing a more weaker, emotionally vulnerable character, I'm here for it, man. I want to see complex characters, and Daemon right now, when it comes to characters, at least that I'm aware of in fiction, he's one of the best. And given the fact that this is the definitive telling of a story that is being, I guess, somewhat adapted, it is being adapted, but the source material being as sparse as it is, kind of makes the quote from the guy who wrote that source material very interesting. We talking about George R.R. Martin. Finish the books, George. Finish the books, doubles down on issues with screenwriters making adaptations their own. 999 times out of 1,000, they make it worse. G, okay, so here's George, dropping this spicy take on his Nada blog, literal a days before his next big paycheck rolls in. It's interesting, right? Because from a surface level reading on that, okay, you have a studio that is adapting your work specifically in one of the most high profile shows to come out this summer. You would think without full context that would be in regards to that very show. But George is in the writer's room. George has had nothing but great things to say about this series, including that Viserys, Paddy Constantine's portrayal of Viserys was even better than the one that he wrote. So no, I don't think that he's talking about House of the Dragon this time around. I think he's talking about what happened at the end of Game of Thrones, and this is the most biting critique that he's ever had for that show, because he's kind of, pussyfooted around any sort of harsh critique of Dave and Dan, and especially what happened after they ran out of source material. But you could also blame George for doing that because, okay, at the beginning of the show, for the first 4 seasons, when they had books to adapt, they were doing a pretty good job. Even the stuff that they were adding on top of that was making the work better. In season 1 specifically, everybody points to the scene where you had Cersei and Robert having a conversation as one of the high points of season 1. And that is completely wholesale and made up for the show. So yeah, if George would have finished the books, wouldn't have had such a lackluster season 5, 6, 7, and 8. But anyways, George R.R. Martin recently took to his personal blog to double down on his issues with Hollywood adaptations and screenwriters attempting to make source material their own. Martin previously spoke out on this issue in 2022 during a discussion with fellow author Neil Gaiman. Interesting, somebody else who has recently had their magnum opus adapted to the screen in the form of Sandman with Neil Gaiman, and he signed off on all of those he, him, they, them, she, her changes. Oh my god, but that's another topic for another time, in which he lamented over the majority of writers in Hollywood thinking that they do not need to be faithful to written works they're adapting for film or television. Very little has changed since then, Martin now wrote on his blog. If everything, things have gotten worse. Everywhere you look, there are more screenwriters and producers eager to take great stories and make them their own. It does not seem to matter whether the source material was written by Stan Lee, Charles Dickens, Ian Fleming, Roald Dahl, Ursula K. Le Guin, J.R.R. Tolkien, Mark Twain, Raymond Chandler, Jane Austen, or, well, anyone. I don't want to mention me among all of those greats, but he's as hubristic as he is wide. Now, no matter how major a writer is, no matter how great the book, there always seems to be someone on hand who thinks they can do it better, eager to take the story and improve on it, Martin added. The book is the book, the film is the film, they will tell you, as if there was something, as if they were saying something profound. Then they make the story their own. They never make it better, though. 999 times out of 1,000, they make it worse. And in a vacuum, these are very agreeable statements. I mean, in the past 10, 15 years, where have we seen an adaptation actually done better than the source material? They're few and far between. You'll have some purists that are out there, regardless of how faithful the adaptation is, say that the book is better. And then you'll have some people swear that the movies are better, the TV show is better. Unlike what's happening right now with House of the Dragon. Martin, however, said, once in a while, we do get a really good adaptation of a really good book. Is this where he's going to go ahead and, pat himself on the back? And when that happens, it deserves applause, such is the case with FX's recent adaptation of Shogun, which is, again, another adaptation, because Shogun came out, a few decades back. I can't remember. Was it 70s or 80s? I think it was 70s, but anyways, which is currently viewed as the frontrunner for the Emmy for Best Drama Series. Well, then again, House of the Dragon Season 2 is right there. I was dubious when I first heard they were making another version of a Clavel novel. It had been a long time, a long time. But I read the book when it first came out in the late 70s and was mighty impressed. 1980 miniseries. Okay, book came out in the 70s, miniseries in the 80s. Starring Richard Chamberlain as Engine and Landmark and long-form television, right up there with Roots, an equal work of fiction. Why do it again? Or why do it over again when the version was so good? I'm glad they did, though. The new Shogun is superb. I think the author would have been pleased. Both old and new screenwriters did honor the source material and gave us terrific adaptation, resisting the impulse to make it their own. I mean, true. Like, you can go ahead. Like, he mentioned Tolkien before, and I just did a video about how if he asked Tom Bombadil isn't going to draw anybody into that failing Rings of Power Season 2, but go check out that video if you want more context on that. But when Peter Jackson decided to adapt the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he did so with the express purpose of being faithful to Tolkien's work. Even as great as that trilogy is, Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R.'s son, wasn't a fan of them because they weren't faithful to the books. And of course, you're entitled to your opinion on that. And there are some people that still prefer the books over the greatest trilogy of all time. And you're entitled to that opinion. People are wrong every day. But Peter did something that is foreign to a lot of screenwriters that are out there, for as many that are just going to completely and totally muff the adaptation element of this because they need to input modern sensibilities or their own personal agendas. People that just don't have any care for the source material in general, just simply want to pilfer a popular IP to insert their own wants and needs. And that's what George is pointing out here. And that's what him and Neil did back in the cut a couple years back. And George is not wrong. And no, he's not talking about House of the Dragon because he's had nothing but great things to say about this. He is simply trying to voice, or rather, here's my opinion, and I'll throw some speculation at the end of this right here. I think he's also trying to throw a little bit of shade towards the end of Game of Thrones and its run and its lackluster reputation now that we're 5 years on from the conclusion of that story, mostly because, well, he's super scared to end his own book series, is playing massively into the decades-long wait. I mean, my favorite piece of information on this is Daenerys Targaryen has been in Meereen since the Clinton administration, and now some theory crafters that are out there are really starting to go back and take a look at A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, the two most recent books. And it's like George has kind of been kicking the can down the road for a long time now, really knowing how he's gonna progress this story at all. So yeah, if George can go ahead and scattershot some blame out there and not put so much pressure on himself, he might end up finishing Winds of Winter. Who knows? It's probably not going to be this winter. Might not even be next winter. But I'd imagine that book's probably coming out. A Dream of Spring, though? Yeah, no, that's going to stay a dream. 1000%. I say if we live 999 lifetimes, 998 of those don't include A Song of Ice and Fire. So George was right when it comes to adaptations. Now just finish the books, George. Finish the books. So with all that said, thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.